Let me tell you something about living in apartment for B. The walls are thin. The hallway smells permanently of someone's Tuesday pasta. The elevator breaks every third week like clockwork. And the man in apartment for C, the one directly next door to me, is, without question, the most distractingly attractive person I have ever had the misfortune of sharing a building with. His name is James Calloway. 29 years old, civil engineer, owner of a suspiciously well-watered succulent collection on his windowsill. And the kind of man who holds the door open even when you're still 15 feet away, which forces you into that awkward half-jog that makes you feel like a golden retriever. Not that I'd noticed. Not that I'd cataloged every small detail about him since I moved in 8 months ago. I'm Lucas, by the way. Lucas Rains. 31, graphic designer, owner of Zero Succulents, because I kill everything green with love. I'm also gay openly. Comfortably, happily so, which around James Calloway had recently started to feel less like a fact about myself and more like a complication. Because James Calloway, as far as I could tell, was straight. He'd had a girlfriend last spring, Megan. A nurse with an infectious laugh who used to wave at me from the hallway. They'd broken up quietly over the summer, which I knew because I'd heard exactly one muffled argument through the wall, followed by several evenings of what sounded like sad country music and the smell of microwaved pizza bleeding under my front door. I'd knocked that first night, not because I'd had a plan. Honestly, I'd been operating entirely on the instinct that a person eating microwave pizza alone while listening to heartbreak country music needs a human presence more than they need privacy. Hey, I'd said, holding up a slightly lopsided container of leftover chicken parmesan I'd made that morning. I made too much. Thought you might want some? James had stood in the doorway looking like someone had just spoken to him in a language he didn't quite recognize. His hair was a disaster. His eyes were doing this tired, quietly wounded thing that I was absolutely not going to think about. He was wearing a faded university sweatshirt and gray joggers, and he was barefoot. He'd taken the container. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," I said. "I wanted to." He'd looked at me for a second longer than necessary. Then, "Thanks, Lucas." I went back to my apartment and made myself a cup of tea and told myself very firmly that I had done a nice thing for a neighbor. That was all. That was absolutely all. I was lying to myself, obviously, over the following months. James and I had settled into something. I could only describe as friendship with uncomfortable electrical undertones. We borrowed things from each other, coffee filters, a phone charger, olive oil at 9 p.m. when neither of us wanted to go to the store. We'd started leaving notes under each other's doors. Little dumb things. "Lucas, your package was delivered. I signed for it. Also, your plant looks sad. Water it. James. To which I responded, "James, the plant is fine. She's just dramatic. Also, thank you. Also, I'm making soup tonight, if you want some." Lucas too, which he responded by knocking on my door 20 minutes later with a bottle of red wine. Leaning against my doorframe with this easy, half-tilted smile that should be illegal. "You said soup," he said. "I brought reinforcements." I stepped back to let him in, and told myself the flipping sensation in my chest was hunger. It was not hunger. We ate soup, and drank wine, and somehow ended up watching a documentary about deep-sea creatures for 2 hours, which devolved into a genuinely passionate argument about whether anglerfish were horrifying or misunderstood. James said, "Horrifying." I misunderstood. Neither of us budged. When he finally got up to leave, he paused at my door and grinned back over his shoulder. "The anglerfish is terrifying. Lucas, the anglerfish is doing its best." "James." He laughed all the way down the hallway, and I stood in my doorway and watched him go, and felt the very specific misery of wanting something you've decided you can't have. November arrived like a gray blanket thrown over the city. I was deep in a deadline for a logo redesign project, living on coffee and designer's guilt. When James knocked on my door on a Wednesday evening, he was wearing a dark green Henley that, I'm just going to say it, fit him extremely well. Why the man growl? Wait, one on, wait, one with the one, wait, one. He handed me one without asking. Tea, he said. You look like you need it. I took it. Our fingers overlapped on the handle for exactly 1 second. He didn't seem to notice. I noticed enough for both of us. You look terrible, by the way, he said cheerfully, stepping past me into my apartment with the ease of someone who'd been doing it for months. Thank you, I said. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me today. Bad day, bad week. Client wants the logo to feel organic, but powerful. Approachable, but authoritative. Modern, but classic. I don't know what that means. I don't think they know what that means. James sat on the arm of my couch, a thing he always did that drove me mildly crazy, because it was both charming and presumptuous, and tilted his head. Sounds like they want a contradiction? Exactly what I said. And what did they say? They said to push the boundaries. I sat down on the couch itself, tucking my feet under me, cradling the mug. Push the boundaries, Lucas. Think outside the box. Lucas? Revolutionize our brand identity while also making it look exactly like our old one. Lucas, James snorted. It was undignified and genuine, and I loved it. Okay, he said. I have a question, and you don't have to say yes. Something in his tone made me look up. He was looking at me differently, not as usual easy teasing, more like someone doing mental calculations. There was a faint tension at the corner of his jaw. Okay, I said carefully. Thanksgiving is next week. Paused. I'm driving down to my family's place. It's a big thing. My mom, my 2 sisters, my brother-in-law, assorted cousins. Another pause. I told them about you. I stared at him. You told your family about me, yeah? What did you tell them? He looked down at his mug, then back up. And there was something in his expression I'd never quite seen there before, something slightly unguarded. I told them you were important to me. Words landed quietly, like something placed down with care. And I asked if you wanted to come. The silence that followed was the loudest silence I'd experienced in years. James Calloway, my straight-next-door neighbor. The man I had been steadfastly and unsuccessfully not falling for, had told his family I was important to him, and was now looking at me across my living room with that careful, open expression, waiting my heart was doing something it had absolutely no business doing. James, I said slowly, your family, Thanksgiving, they know that I'm gay. Of course they know, he said, like it was obvious. I told them everything about you. Everything. He'd told them everything. I took a long sip of tea to buy myself 1 second to exist in the absolute chaos of my own emotions. Okay, I said finally. His face did something subtle and wonderful. Yeah, I said. I'll come. He smiled then, the full one, not the careful one, and I thought, not for the first time, I am in enormous trouble. The drive down and the dangerous hours words. Approximately 2,500 rising tension. Flirtation. Family arrival the morning of the drive was gray and cold and smelled. Like possibility. Or maybe that was just James's cologne. Which was doing something completely unreasonable to my ability to function like a normal human being. We'd agreed to leave at 7 a.m. James had loaded his car, a sensible dark blue Subaru that somehow suited him perfectly the night before. I had packed a bag with what I considered to be a reasonable amount of care in what my internal voice told me was a pathetic amount of hope. I'd brought wine. A good bottle, because if I was going to meet James's family for Thanksgiving, I was going to make an effort. I'd also changed my outfit 3 times. Not because of James. Absolutely not. Purely out of a general commitment to personal presentation, it was because of James. He knocked at 6:58, and when I opened the door, he looked at me with that slightly too attentive gaze he sometimes had. The one that made me feel like I was being read and said, "You look good," just like that. Casual, matter of fact. Like it was something he said to neighbors all the time. "Thanks," I managed. "You, too." He was wearing a dark navy sweater and dark jeans, and a scarf that was slightly crooked around his neck. Something in me twitched with the urge to reach over and fix it. I didn't ready. He said, "Absolutely not." I said pleasantly. Let's go. He laughed and picked up my bag before I could, which I didn't argue about because I was too busy cataloging the way his shoulders moved when he lifted things. I really needed to get my feelings under control. The drive was 3 hours. 3 hours in a small car, close enough that when James reached across me to adjust the glove compartment at a red light, I could feel the warmth radiating from his arm. We talked the whole way. That was the thing about James and me. We'd never struggled with silence, but we also never ran out of conversation. It just flowed, easy and unhurried, from topic to topic. We talked about his work, a bridge renovation project that he got genuinely animated about, his hands moving as he described the structural problem they'd solved last month. I told him about a mural commission I was considering, and he asked questions I hadn't expected him to ask, smart questions, the kind that made me think harder about my own ideas an hour in. He plugged his phone into the aux cord, and a song I didn't recognize came on, something with a low guitar and a voice that felt like winter sunlight. "What is this?" I asked Gregory Alan Isakov. I don't know, he just makes me feel settled. I turned to look at him. The light through the windshield was doing something soft to his jaw, the curve of his cheek. "Which makes you feel settled," I repeated quietly. "Yeah." He glanced sideways at me, brief and warm. "Like everything's okay?" Something passed between us, in the car then. Not words. Just a quality of air. An awareness. I turned back to the window. My reflection looked back at me with an expression that said, "You are completely gone for this man." "I know," I told my reflection. "I'm dealing with it." "You are not dealing with it." I'm aware around the 2-hour mark. We stopped for gas and coffee at a roadside place that had a hand-painted sign, reading "Best Pie in 3 Counties" probably. James ordered a black coffee. I ordered a latte. He grabbed a slice of apple pie without asking and broke it in half and handed me the bigger piece. "You didn't ask?" I said. "You are going to want it. Lucas, you make a specific face when you're near baked goods. It's very transparent." I opened my mouth. I closed it. He was grinning, that particular grin, the one that crinkled the corner of his eye, and leaning back against the counter with an ease that was just entirely unfair. "What face?" I demanded. "I want that, but I'm going to pretend I don't face." "You also make it other times," he added, almost as an afterthought. Eyes flickering to mine for just a moment, the pie suddenly tasted very significant. "Eat your pie." "James," I said, because I had absolutely no other response available. He smiled at his coffee cup. "Already am." The Calloway house was a farmhouse-style home at the end of a long oak-lined driveway, with yellow lights spilling from every window and 2 cars already parked on the gravel. Smoke curled from the chimney. The whole thing looked like someone had staged it to be aggressively welcoming. I sat in the passenger seat for 1 extra second after James cut the engine. "Hey." His voice was quiet. I turned to find him already facing me and closer than I expected. The car was small and he'd shifted toward me. "Thank you for coming. You invited me. Yeah, but you could have said no." Something in his gaze was steady and serious in a way that made my breath catch. "I'm glad you didn't." The space between us felt like a held breath. "James." The front door burst open. A woman in an apron appeared on the porch with the velocity of someone who had been watching the driveway for the last 20 minutes, which she absolutely had. She was in her late 50s, dark-haired, bright-eyed, and she hollered "James Michael Calloway" across the front yard with a warmth that could have thawed glaciers. James laughed, a real one. Surprised and fond, and muttered, "That's my mom," as he pushed open his door. I followed him out of the car and into what I can only describe as the full warmth of a family that loves each other out loud. His mother. "Patricia. Call me Patty. Everyone does," pulled James. Into a hug that lasted a full 5 seconds, and then turned to me with eyes that were exactly the same color as James's. Warm and attentive, and said, "You must be Lucas." "Yes, ma'am," I said. "It's so lovely to meet you." She cupped my face in both hands. Something I had absolutely not been prepared for, and beamed at me. Like I was something she'd been waiting to see. "For a long time?" "Talks about you all the time," she said. with a pointed look at James that I did not know how to interpret but very much wanted to. James cleared his throat. "Mom, I'm just saying." She took my arm and steered me toward the house. "Come inside, sweetheart. It's cold. James, get the bags." I threw a glance back at James over my shoulder. He was standing next to the car, bags in hand, watching me get carried off by his mother with an expression I could only describe as quietly delighted. His mouth's curved. "Worth it," he mouthed back, and I turned back toward the warm yellow house and thought, I am absolutely, completely, irreversibly in love with him. The timing was terrible. I'd deal with it later. Thanksgiving dinner and the dangerous truth words, approximately 2,600 climax. Revelation, the almost moment inside the Calloway house. Thanksgiving was a full sensory experience. The kitchen smelled of roasted herbs and butter and something caramelizing on the stove. A playlist of old Motown drifted from somewhere. 2 dogs, a beagle named Biscuit, and something enormous and fluffy named Professor, appeared immediately. The Professor, pressing his full, considerable weight against my leg in greeting. James's older sister. Claire was at the kitchen island chopping celery and immediately began interrogating me with the cheerful ruthlessness of someone who had been waiting for exactly this. She was 34, sharp-eyed, possessed of James's same tendency to look at you like they were working something out. "So you're the famous Lucas," she said, extending a hand that had celery on it. "We've heard a lot." "All good things, I hope," I said, shaking her hand, celery and all, mostly. She grinned. "He mentioned the anglerfish argument." "Apparently you hold unreasonable opinions." "The anglerfish," I said with great dignity, "is misunderstood." From the hallway, without looking up from the bags he was setting down, James called out, "It's terrifying. It's doing its best." Claire looked between us with the expression of someone mentally updating a theory. "Interesting," she said, to no one in particular, and turned back to her celery. The afternoon passed in the beautiful chaos of family. James's younger sister, Sophie, arrived at noon with her husband Dex and a 7-year-old named Owen, who immediately decided I was his personal project and spent 45 minutes showing me every corner of the house, including the attic window where, apparently, you could see almost to the highway. I held my own. I helped Patty with the green beans and grated cheese for the casserole and listened to stories about James as a child. The time he'd tried to engineer a treehouse and gotten the angles wrong so it listed to one side like a very committed drunk. The summer, he'd decided to map the entire creek behind the house and produced a drawing that was, according to Patty, technically perfect and completely useless. He was always building things, Patty said fondly, glancing toward the living room where James was now in a loud debate with Dex about football, taking things apart to see how they worked. "That explains a lot about him," I said without thinking. Patty gave me that look again, that warm, knowing, patient look, and said, "Yes, it does." I focused very intently on the green beans. Dinner was the kind of meal that belongs in memory. A long table set with mismatched plates and candles and wine bottles. Everyone talking over each other in the comfortable way of people who've eaten at this table 100 times. The turkey was slightly overcooked in one wing and perfectly golden everywhere else. The pie pumpkin, 2 kinds, appeared from the kitchen like a parade. I'd been seated next to James, not across from him. Next to him, close enough that our arms brushed when we both reached for the bread basket at the same moment. Close enough that when little Owen climbed over half the table to show James something on a tablet, James leaned back to see it, and his shoulder pressed warm and solid against mine for a full 30 seconds that he didn't move away from. Neither did I. At some point, Dex raised a glass and called for a round of gratitude, Calloway tradition. Sophie explained to me with a slightly apologetic smile, "Don't panic." Each person said one thing they were grateful for. Patty said family, and meant it with the particular weight of someone who'd lost people. Claire said her new job with a laugh that didn't quite hide how much it meant. Sophie said Owen. Dex said pie with comic timing that landed perfectly. Then James. He turned his wine glass slowly in his fingers. His voice when he spoke was quieter than usual, directed at the table rather than the room. "I'm grateful," he said, for the year getting better than it started. Paused. And for someone who showed up at my door with chicken parmesan at exactly the right moment. He didn't look at me when he said it, but his knee, under the table, pressed gently against mine, and he didn't move it away. The entire table looked at me. I felt my face do something involuntary. I'm glad the pasta helped, I said, which made the table laugh, and which gave me approximately 4 seconds to collect myself. When it was my turn, I said, I'm grateful for neighbors who knock on your door when you need tea and don't give you a chance to say no. I paused. And for being included in something that feels a lot like home. Patty pressed a hand over her heart. Under the table. James's knee pressed a little more firmly against mine. It was after dinner. During the clearing of plates and the general comfortable drift of a meal well eaten, that Claire appeared at my elbow. Walk with me, she said, in a tone that suggested this was not entirely optional. We took our glasses out to the porch. The night was cold and clear, stars thick overhead the way they only are in places that don't have much light pollution. Inside, through the window, I could see James helping Owen build something with napkin rings and salt shakers. He's been different this year, Claire said. I looked at her carefully. Different how? Lighter. She leaned on the railing, wineglass cradled in both hands. When he and Megan broke up, we were worried. He went quiet in a way that didn't feel like him. And then around, I want to say September, something shifted. He started calling more. Telling stories. She glanced at me. They were almost all about you. I didn't say anything. The anglerfish thing. The soup. The note about the plant. She paused. He told me about the documentary night. He said we argued about anglerfish for 2 hours, and it was the best evening I'd had in months. It was a good documentary. Lucas. Her voice was direct and kind and left nowhere to hide. I'm his sister. I've seen James interested in people before. He's not someone who talks about people the way he talks about you. He just isn't. The cold felt sharper suddenly. I looked through the window at James, who was now laughing at whatever Owen had built. His whole face open and unguarded in the way it got sometimes when he wasn't performing anything. He's never said anything, I said. It came out quieter than I intended. No, Claire agreed. He wouldn't. Not until he was sure. She looked at me with something precise and gentle. Are you sure? The question landed in my chest like a key turning. I've been sure for months, I said honestly. I just thought that he was straight. People are complicated, Lucas. He doesn't put labels on things. He never has. But I know what it looks like when my brother is in love with someone. Love. The word sat between us in the cold night air. The door behind us opened. We both turned. James stepped out, 2 mugs in hand, saw us, and paused. Claire, he said, in a tone that was brotherly and suspicious. What are you doing? Nothing. She took one of the mugs from him, kissed his cheek, and went back inside with the serenity of someone who has done exactly what she intended. The door clicked shut behind her. James turned to me. The porch light was doing something golden to him. His expression was somewhere between nervous and careful. And the care I'd never quite seen from him directed so completely at me. He extended the second mug. I took it. Our fingers overlapped on the handle, the same as that Wednesday evening with the tea, except this time, neither of us pretended not to notice. What did she say to you? He asked. That you talk about me. A muscle moved in his jaw. Yeah, a lot, apparently. Yeah, he said again. Quieter, I looked at him in the cold, clear night. This man I had moved next door to by accident and fallen for by every degree of certainty. James, why did you bring me here? He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, voice low and honest, because I wanted you here. Because this is the realest place in my life, and I wanted you to be in it. He paused. Because when I think about things that matter to me, you're near the top of the list. And I don't really know what to do with that. The stars were very bright. I set my mug on the porch railing and turned fully to face him. I think I said carefully, we should maybe talk about what you're near the top of my list for. His breathing changed. Subtle, but I was paying close enough attention to notice. "Okay," he said softly. "Tomorrow?" I said. Because the porch door was made of glass, and I could see Claire and Sophie definitely not watching us from the kitchen. When we don't have an audience, James glanced back, clocked his sisters, and made a face that was pained and fond. "Yeah," he said. "Tomorrow." Picked up my mug and handed it back to me, and when he did, his fingers stayed around mine for just one beat longer than necessary. Warm, deliberate. "Thank you for being here," he said quietly. "Lucas." The way he said my name. I was going to need tomorrow to arrive immediately. The morning after, and the thing we finally say words. Approximately 2,600 resolution. Confession, happy ending, I didn't sleep particularly well. This was not a complaint. I was in a soft guest room in a warm house that smelled of pine and leftover pie. And I was awake not from anxiety but from a specific electric anticipation that had settled somewhere between my ribs and refused to let me fully rest. I lay in the dark and thought about James. About the way he'd said, "because I wanted you here." About his knee under the table, the deliberate warmth of his hand over mine on the mug. About Claire's voice. I know what it looks like when my brother is in love with someone. Was it possible I'd been wrong about him? Not because I'd misread him, but because he'd been quietly, privately working something out about himself? The thought felt careful and important, the kind of thought that deserved respect. What I knew. James had brought me here. James had told his family I was important. James had kept his knee pressed against mine for the better part of an hour and then held my hand on a cold porch and looked at me like I was something. He'd made a decision about whatever labels did or didn't apply, whatever. He was still figuring out what I felt was real, and what he was showing me was real. I fell asleep somewhere around 2 a.m. thinking about the way he laughed. The house was quiet when I came downstairs at 6-30, almost quiet. James was in the kitchen. He was standing at the stove in sweatpants and a worn gray t-shirt, doing something with a pan, and his feet were bare on the tile. His hair was slightly ridiculous. He had no idea yet that I was there, and for one unobserved moment I stood in the doorway and let myself just look at him. The ease of him. The warmth of him in this kitchen that had shaped him. Then he turned and saw me. And his entire face softened in a way that hit me somewhere fundamental. "Hey," he said. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I said, which was true, and which told him nothing. Me neither. He held up the pan. "Eggs, please." I moved into the kitchen and poured myself coffee from the pot he'd already made. Of course he had, and leaned against the counter a few feet from him. The house was asleep. The only sounds were the pan, the birds outside, the radiator's quiet tick. James, Lucas. I think we should have the conversation. He set the spatula down. He turned to face me properly, and he crossed his arms, not defensively. More like he was bracing for something he wanted to walk toward anyway. "Yeah," he said. "I think so too." Silence. The radiator ticked. "You first," I said, because I have always been a coward in exactly this particular way. Something moved through his expression, amusement. He looked at the floor for a second, then back up. "Okay," he said. "Here's the thing." He uncrossed his arms, put his hands flat on the counter behind him. This year has done a lot to me. The breakup. Being alone. A lot of time to think. Looked at me steadily. I've been thinking a lot about what I want, and I kept everything I was working toward kept circling back to you. My coffee was getting cold. I wasn't moving. "I've never been here before," he continued, "with a man. I want to be honest about that. But I also," he exhaled. "I know what I feel, Lucas. I've known for a while. And what I feel is, I want to be around you all the time. I think about you when you're not there. Every good thing I want to tell you first." Pause. "I don't know what to call that, but I don't think the name matters as much as whether you..." He stopped. "Whether I what?" I asked, very quietly. "Whether you feel it too." The kitchen was absolutely still. I set my coffee cup down on the counter. I moved toward him 2 steps. 3, until I was close enough to see the slight tension at the corner of his jaw, the careful hope in his eyes. James, I said. I have been failing not to fall in love with you for the better part of 8 months. Something broke open in his face. Not dramatically, gently, the way ice on a river releases in early spring, shifting and letting the water through. Yeah. His voice was low. Yeah. I looked at him. The chicken parmesan wasn't really about having leftovers. A short, startled laugh left him. He dropped his head forward for a second, shoulders shaking, and I felt the laugh travel through me like warmth. When he looked back up, his eyes were bright. The anglerfish documentary, he said, was absolutely a real argument. I said firmly. It was also the best evening I'd had in months, possibly years. Me too, he said. Every single time with you. He reached out slowly, deliberately, and his hand came up to the side of my jaw, his thumb resting against my cheek. Warm, certain. Every time is better than the last. I put my hand over his. Held it there. Should know, I said, a little unsteadily, that I'm a lot. I have opinions about everything. I'll fight you about the anglerfish until I die. I make soup when I'm anxious. I leave notes everywhere. I'm going to want all of this. I gestured vaguely between us. And I don't do it halfway. Lucas, he said, with a patience and a warmth that I was going to hear in my chest for years. Yes, I know. He stepped closer. That's why I want it. When he kissed me, it was slow and warm and tasted like coffee. And it was like the final piece of a sentence. Clicking into place, it was like walking through a door you'd been standing in front of for a long time and finding exactly what you'd hoped was on the other side. The eggs burned. Discovered this approximately 5 minutes later when a small tendril of smoke curled up from the forgotten pan and James crossed the kitchen in 2 strides to pull it off the heat. And I leaned against the counter laughing. And he turned around with the pan in his hand and looked at me with that expression, that full, unguarded, delighted expression, and said, I'll make more eggs. Worth it, I said. Worth it. He agreed. The rest of Thanksgiving morning was the kind of morning you want to keep. We made eggs a second time, this time successfully, and ate them at the kitchen island in the early quiet before the rest of the house woke up. We talked about the next step, about what this was, about the fact that James had apparently been composing and discarding things he wanted to say to me for months, which I found both exasperating and completely endearing. You could have just told me, I said. I was working up to it, he said. You invited me to Thanksgiving. To meet your whole family? That's hardly subtle, James. I'm an engineer. We prefer to build up to things structurally. That is the best sentence you've ever said. He stole a bite off my plate, which I absolutely should not have found as endearing as I did. I fixed his collar. It had flipped up on one side and let my fingers linger against his neck for just a second longer than the task required. He went very still. Then he turned his head slightly and pressed a quick, warm kiss to my knuckles. Good morning, he said, with a quiet smile that was just for me. Good morning, said Patty came downstairs at 7-30. She took one look at the two of us, at the quality of the air, at the way we were sitting, at something in our faces, and she set her hand briefly on top of mine where it rested on the counter, and squeezed once, and went to pour herself coffee, and said nothing except, There's leftover pie, which was all the blessing anyone needed. Claire came down at 8, took one look, pointed at James, said called it, with the energy of someone who has been right about something for a long time, and then hugged me with genuine warmth before retreating to the living room. Sophie looked between us when she appeared, nodded once like a scientist confirming a hypothesis, and said Owen is going to be insufferable about this. He already told James he needed to find someone nice. Consider this his endorsement. James put his head in his hands. I laughed until my eyes watered. We drove home on Sunday, the same road, the same gray autumn light, the same Gregory Alan Isakov drifting from the speakers. But everything was different in the way that only the inside of things can change. The world looking the same while containing entirely new information. James had his hand resting on the gear shift between us. At some point, somewhere between the state line and the 2-hour mark, I put my hand over his. He turned his palm up and laced his fingers through mine. Neither of us said anything for a long time then, the anglerfish. With the tone of someone willing to reconsider? Yes. I said, "Is maybe," he said, slightly misunderstood. I squeezed his hand. "That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me." "Give me time," he said quietly. "I'm just getting started." The road stretched ahead. The music played. His thumb moved gently against the back of my hand, and I sat in that car with the man I loved driving home, and felt the very particular happiness of someone who almost talked themselves out of something perfect and didn't. Some stories don't announce themselves. They begin with a knocked door and a container of chicken parmesan and a neighbor who holds the door open even when you're still 15 feet away. They unfold in documentary nights and quiet hallway notes and wine at 9 p.m. and a long drive through November light. They ask you to be brave enough to say the thing you've been saying with everything except words, and when they finally name themselves, when they look you in the eye, in a quiet kitchen at dawn, they feel less like a beginning and more like an arrival. Like, oh, there you are. I've been here. I know. I've been here too.